Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In the context of a concert, we see that a variety of compositions come together to give us that beautiful aesthetic experience. As I mentioned earlier also, compositions are of a variety like Varnam, Kriti, Tillana, Javali, Kavadi, Chindu and so on. Now, if we look at a concert and suppose we present only Varnams throughout, then it will become a monotonous affair. Or if it's going to be continuously Kritis, of course in Kritis there are so many varieties, so that way a number of Kritis itself can give us a beautiful experience in a concert. The Varnam again marks the beginning of a concert. So every composition also has its own placement in the context of a concert. A Varnam cannot be sung at the end of a concert, or a Tillana for example, which is generally sung towards the fag end of a concert, it cannot become the introductory piece of a concert. So there are certain norms in which a concert is presented. This has been given to us by our great veterans, the earlier musicians who have been performing. And it is also said that Arikudi Sri Ramanuja Iyengar was a pioneer in terms of setting this concert format that we are so successfully following even today. So sometimes we say the survival of the fittest. So earlier there have been many concert formats, but the kind of concert format that he devised, giving a variety fare of kind of compositions for us, has stood the test of time, and today also we follow it successfully, of course with minor variations depending on the context, depending on the theme and so on. In the context of a concert, or even just if you look at a compositional form, after the Geetam which comes to be learnt by a student is the Varnam. And in a Kacheri also we see that the first item which is generally presented is a Varnam. Now, what is a Varnam and how is it different from the other compositional forms like Kriti, Tillana, Ajavali and so on? A Varnam basically has very minimal number of words, I would say, and the raga becomes like a tool to knit the whole particular composition. In a Kriti, as we mentioned earlier, the Sahitya is very important because it may convey different kinds of emotion. For example, if you take the case of Sri Tyagarajar, where you see that a particular composition may convey his happiness on seeing Lord Rama, sometimes he is vexed, sometimes he is sad, sometimes he is disappointed. And if you look at the case of Sri Shama Sastri, it's a kind of a complete surrender that he depicts through his composition. But these kind of emotions are not a part of a Varnam, where the primary focus of a Varnam is to bring out the raga in its multi-hued beauty, to bring out its multiple facets. The raga's facets are to be brought out through a Varnam. So that way we see that, as I said, the words are very minimal, and sometimes you are not even able to identify what the words are because the vowel extensions are so long and extensive at sometimes that we even lose track of what the words are actually. Now, most importantly in a Varnam, apart from the ragas, Arona, Avarona, which is followed in the whole kind of the composition, more importantly we see that the gamakas inherent in that particular ragam are focused very intricately in every Varnam. That's why we also say that for a student it is important to learn a lot of Varnams so that it gives us a better insight about the Lakshana of the ragas. It gives us a deeper kind of look into how the raga sounds, what are the phrases to be used, which are the notes to be focused, which notes are to be used in a very limited manner. Many kinds of things are revealed in a Varnam. Also because of the fact that you would have understood in a Kriti we only sing the Sahitya, but most part of a Varnam contains only the Swara syllables or the Swaras. So that way the Swaras explicitly give us an idea about how the raga actually flows. Now, in the Varnam, there are basically two types of Varnam that we see among the classification. One is called the Tana Varnam and another is called the Pada Varnam. Now, what is the difference between Tana Varnam and Pada Varnam? The Tana Varnam basically, it follows the Tana pattern, especially the earlier Varnams. Now, if you look at some of the later Varnams like that of Sri Lalgudi Jayaraman, Sri Balamurali Krishna and others, there is a kind of fresh approach, I would say, towards the concept of Varnam itself, which we'll see also now later. So, the Tana Varnam, basically another important thing is that in a Tana Varnam, the Muktai Swaram or the Charana Swaras are sung, and after that there is no Sahitya to it. But the most important thing about a Pada Varnam is that to every Swara passage there is a corresponding Sahitya. And that's why we also see that in the domain of our Carnatic Kacheris, we sing more of Tana Varnams. Generally, that's how it happens. And these Pada Varnams become an important part of dance music. You see that in the many dance performance, in the Nritta and Abhinaya part, these come very useful in the sense that Swaras are first sung and in different variations, and then the Sahitya are sung in different variations for the Abhinaya to happen. So that way the Padavarnams are an important part of the dance music. We also have something called the Daru Varnam, where you see that apart from that Swaras, Jati, Sahitya, all of them combined together to give us, and one of the most important among this Daru Varnam is the Kamas Varnam by Harikeshanallu Muttiya Bhagavathar, Mate Malaya Dvaja, that you would have heard quite often in concerts as well as in the dance domain. Coming to the Tana Varnam again, let us look at it in a more intent manner to see how it is structured. We have very traditional Varnams that we start learning when we start learning music. Shankara Varnam, Mohanam, Kalyani, Abogi, Todi. So these kind of Varnams are all taught to us so that we get a cognizance of the Lakshana of the Raga in full measure. Of course, later on learning many more Kritis in that same Raga gives us different insights about the Ragam, but how a student should understand the Ragam, for that the main material or the main source, I would say, are the Varnams. Let us look at a very simple and common Varnam, the Mohanam Varnam, which we all sing as one of the beginning learning process. So, Sari ga pada sa, sa da pa ga re sa, ninnu kori yona nura ni la loka nayaka, where you can obviously see here that the Tana pattern is followed in that particular way of structuring the notes itself. Let us look at another Varnam in Abogi. Yavari bodha nagavi nila guje sevura javaga nannele rayasesha chale draya Shri Venkateshwara Riga Mariga Sariga Sari Sada Mada Sada Sari Riga Sariga Mada Magarisa Riga Maga Mada Mada Sa Riga Sariga Magariga Risada Risada Magarisa Yovari Bodaga Na. So, this was the first part of this Abogi Varnam. Looking at it intently, you see that there are two sections of Sahitya here, what we call as the Pallavi or the Anupallavi, two sections here, and then the Mukta Iswaram. Now, these together form the first part of it, and then the second part of it is the Charanam and the Charanaswaras. So, where you see in the Charanam, Maruba Hari Korva Jala Nure. Now, if you want to divide it into a broader one, you could say that this is the Purvanga is the Pallavi, Anupallavi and the Mukta Iswaram, and the Uttaranga or the latter portion is the Charana and the Charanaswaras. Now, again let's look at the Charanam and the Charanaswaras. Before that, I would also like you to understand that in the concept of Varnas, there is a rigid way of construction. Now later we will be looking into the Kritis, where you see that there are so many varieties that the Kriti can offer, but generally constructing or creating or composing a Varnam demands a certain amount of discipline. You can't just have 10 avartanas of the Pallavi and then 2 avartanas of the Anupallavi and then say about 5 avartanas of the Muktaiswaram and so on. Generally, you would see that in these cases, like especially the common Varnams that I am mentioning here, the Pallavi consists of 2 avartanas, the Anupallavi 2 avartanas, the Muktaiswaram again 2 avartanas, and then the Charanam. And even in the Charanam now while I will be singing, you will see that there is a proper methodical way in which the swaras have to progress. That is very, very important here. You cannot sing it any way you want. So that way you see that every composer worth the name, any popular composer, established composer of Varnam, you would see that he follows all these norms when he composes Varnam. And that is why I always say that this is also very different from a Kriti. In fact, many you would also heard about the case of very even the most important composers, like if you look at Shama Sastri or Tyagarajar or Papanasam Sivan, it's more by instinct and an emotional outpour that all these Kritis have come out. Many of the Kritis, as a state of their expression of their emotion, it has come out. But in the case of Varnam, it is, I would say, more structured and you have to plan it. You cannot just compose extempore like that. There should be a proper thought process. There should be some kind of a discipline in terms of composing the Varnam. Now coming back to the Abhogi Varnam, first you saw that Yevari Bodhaga Naraga Vi Ni Laga Gu Jay Se Buraga. The first section gets complete then. Javaga Mugaga Nannelega Raga Sesha Chalegin Draya Shigi Venkateshwaraga. The next section gets complete. Then the Swara. Rega Mariga. That becomes the Muktaiswara. Now let's look at the Charana part of this particular composition. Maruba Harigi Korvajalaga Nuraga. After that, generally, if you see again, how many such passages of swaras should be there? For that also there is rule. So generally, you would see that there are 4 sets of swaras which happen as part of the Charanam. The first one generally has got karvais in it, and then after that you have the different swaras coming in, and the final swara which comes is more like a round off of the entire ragam. So you would see that it may start on the tarasthai, but then it gives a complete kind of a overall roundup of the entire ragam. So first swaram now, where I mentioned that it has to have karvais. So Maya da ma da sa da ma gari sa ri ga ma ru ba hari ki kor va jala ga nu ra. The second swaram. Mada sada mada magari ga magari sada sari ga mada sada magari sari ga maruba hari ki korva jala ga nura. The third swaram. Da sa da ma ga re ga ma da sa re sa re ga ma da sa re ga re sa da ma ga re sa re ga ma ru ba ha re gi kor va ja la ga nu ra ga. The last one. Sa 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 re ga sa re sa da ma da sa da re sa da ma ga re sa re ga ma da sa re ga ma re ga re sa da ma da sa da ma ga re sa re ga ma ru ba ha re gi kor va ja la ga nu ra ga. So coming back to this particular charanam again, let us revisit again and see. So first one, ma ga ga da ma da sa da ma ga ri sa ri ga. So like that, if you take another very popular varnam, ninnu kori sannutanga srini vasa. Here also the first varam, ga ri sa ri da sa ri ga ri sannutanga srini vasa. Like this, if you examine all the varnas, you will see that this pattern of having karvai swaras in the first is one of the significant lakshana also, I would say, in terms of devising the charanam itself. The second one you saw, again, it also gives us indication about the important starting notes of the particular ragam, like in coming back to again avogi, ma da, the second charanam, ma da sa da ma ga ri, third charanam, da sa da ma ga ri ga ma, fourth charanam, sa sa. So ma da sa. So these are the important starting points for abogi. This is one thing we are able to understand here. Then of course the charanas, if you examine intently, you will be able to see how the movements of the ragam happens and which note has to be accentuated, like ma da ma da. So the da becomes a very important note in abogi. Again, da sa da ma ga ri ga ma da ma ga ri ga sa re ga ma da sa re ga ri sa da ma ga ri sa re ga. So ma da. So how that relationship happens, all that is brought out through the swaras here. Now, going much more deeper into the varnam, if you look at the classic varnams of our great composers, you also see how the nuances of the ragam, the gamakas of the ragam are hidden in that particular varnam. And again, as I said earlier also, this is why we keep telling that students should learn a lot of varnam so that they understand the intricacies of the notes. As I always say, the raga is not in the notes, but it is in the space between the notes. So the space between the notes is what is being used here now in the varnams to give you that insight into the ragam. We look into Saveri here for that example. Sa ri ma pa da sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa. The opening phrase itself is a very unique phrase, I would say. So, sa ra su da sa ri ga ri ga ri. The student should immediately think here as to sa ri ma. There is no ga in the arohanam. So obviously this sa ri ga ri ga ri, the ga is indicative of the avarona krama here, that sa ri ga ri ga ri. I have also heard some students sing this wrongly as sa ri ga ri ga ri. This again is a major mistake because of the fact that there are also some rules about how we approach a note when it is part of the arohana or how we approach a note when it's part of the avarohana. Now the same sari ga ma, if it comes as in that sequence, like in Mayamalagola, sari ga ma pada ni sa sari ga ma, either way you can do it. But now here in this Saveri, you see that there is a hidden thing here, that the Gandhara only comes in the Avarohana. So you have to use the Gandhara such that the Shruti value is very diminished. So the sound is not sa re ga ri ga ri. It's not that. Sa re ga ri ga ri. So it's also indicative of the placement of the Gandhara, which is almost on the Rishabha. Again, listen intently. Sa re ga So the starting point of that Gandhara is on the Rishabha. Similarly, if you look at the Pada Sani Dapa, so sometimes Pada Nida Magari, that Pada Nida again, the same principle applies there also, where it's Pada Sa Sani Dapa, that is how it comes. So when the Padani comes as a part of this phrase, Padani Dapa, Dani Damagari, Dani Damagari, Nidamagari. So then there also we see that the value of the nishada gets diminished. Like this we see that many aspects of the lakshana of the ragam actually gets kind of shown by the varnam itself. Now if you look at the Tana varnam, this is the thing. Basically these are some of the features. But if you look at the next aspect, that is a pada varnam, we see that in the pada varnam there is a different concept, as I said, that where the swaras are followed by the respective sahityas. For example, if you look at the a popular varnam of Sri Papanasam Sivan in the ragam Natakurunji, Swami Nanundanadibai Endre Ulagamellam Ariyume Tamadam Seyyadu Vandarul Mador Panka Budesha, like that it goes. So there where the in the Mukta Iswaram Sa Nida Nida Ma Sa Nida Nisa Samaga Madani Sari Kamaga Sani Re Sani Sani Nida Maga Sari Madani. For that there is a Sahityam like Seljadadavigil Ilam Pirai Deva Gangayomur. Like this for the charanam also you see Nataraja Deva Sachidayananda Magasa Nirisa Nida Nisa Danisa Riganatara Jayadeva Sachidayananda Gadum Nin அழகில் காதல் கொண்ட இவளை பனடர ஜகதேவா சச்சிதானந்த. Like this we see that in the case of Padavarnam, the Sahityam is a very, very important element. In the later Varnams, just we look into a small Varnam to see how the concepts or the basic principles are kind of made more newer and fresher in the compositions or the varnams of composers like Lalgudi Jayaraman. And one more aspect, of course, to give you an extreme example of varnam where the words actually do not make any kind of significance, I would say, is the classical Viriboni Varnam, where you see Virebo Ni Ne Ko Ri. This is a classic example of a varnam where, in fact, one of the senior musicians would say, if somebody asks you the lyrics of the Viriboni Varnam and asks you to tell what the lyrics is, it's difficult because of the fact that they are so much kind of spaced out, and the whole Varnam is about bringing out the nuances of Bhairavi. So here the Sahityam becomes kind of insignificant. So Vi Re Bo. So the vowels become so extended to give you the quintessence of Bhairavi. Looking at one last example of a modern day composer, Lalgudi Jayaraman, taking a varnam like say a varamo, Saga Madani Sa Sanida Magasa Nambum Anber Karulum Yogalnaye. Here you see that the concept of the understanding of the lyrics is much better. You are able to understand what I am saying whether though it is Varamu that is being brought out, you are also able to understand the lyrics. Nenjam namarubaye niye tunai ambuya karniya kila jaganayaki adari taruna niyallar yaramba magasaga sadabagama sagama gadabani dasadani badagama magadama nidasani gasamaga samagamadani samagamagasani dabagasanam bum anbar karulum. Here also, though you are able to see that the lyrics are visible, the principles are the same. For example, the charanam tamadam yenam ma daye seidida dagama sagani sadani sagama tamadam yenam ma daye seidida dani vanida bagasaga dasani gasamaga manida sani gani gasani da bata madam yenam. So thus we see that Varnams, whether they are Padavarnam or Tanavarnam or Daruvarnam, all of them follow a strict discipline in terms of their form. And when we look at the Kriti, you will see that how many vast varieties the Kriti is able to offer. Of course, in the Varnam again, the thought process of each composer is different. So even in the same Kalyani, if you look at Aditala Varnam to Adatala Varnam, it will be totally different in terms of the conceptualization of the raga, because each composer has a own thought process. But nevertheless, we understand that the Varnams have got a more rigid form compared to the other compositional forms, and learning the Varnam is very, very important for every student of music because of the fact that it gives us an insight into the raga lakshana. It also gives us a complete understanding of the intricate details of the ragam for us to pursue music further.